Good morning. It is good to see everyone this morning. My name is Chris Burkholder, and I'm the current president of KCA, and I want to welcome each and every one of you to Convention 2016, Counseling with a Purpose. It is my hope that the next 2 days will be filled with lots of fun for all of you, but that you can learn skills and strategies and new ideas to take back and use in your professions, your jobs at home. But I also hope that you have time to reestablish new relationships and a new group of people that you can network with, and also still continue the old relationships that you had prior to coming to KCA. So I hope you have time to network. And just as important, I hope that everyone takes time to relax, laugh a little bit, rejuvenate yourself, and have fun. Our convention committee has worked extremely hard planning a quality, dynamic convention for you this year. And if you've ever helped plan an event like this, you know that it takes a team of dedicated individuals, and it also takes an organized and fearless leader. And I want to introduce you this year to one of our convention co-chairs, Val Eichman. She has been the one that's been kind of headed up, that has headed up the convention committee this year, and she's done a wonderful job. So Val?
Good morning, and I'm also glad that you are all here. Thank you for being a part of our conference 2016. This has pretty much been 10 months in the making, and I do want to recognize, because one person cannot do it alone, I do want to recognize those 9 individuals who put in some time, whether it was behind the scenes, working directly with me. Linda Scribner helped me tremendously as my co-chair. If you served on the conference planning committee, if you were a part of the awards committee and or the program selection committee, I just would like for you to all stand and be recognized at this time. Thank you so very much. And if anybody would be willing to serve on the board in any capacity, I'd be happy to take your name anytime throughout the next 2 days, because we are always looking for individuals to serve in some way and give back to the organization. Next, I'm going to go ahead and introduce and welcome back our keynote speaker, Eric Easton of Kansas. Giving you a little bit of background on Eric. He completed his master's degree in rehabilitation counseling from West Virginia University and a doctoral degree in counselor education from Ohio University. He is a licensed professional counselor, a national certified counselor, a certified rehabilitation counselor, and is working toward his board certification in neurofeedback. Eric has nearly 10 years of experience as a professional counselor in various settings, which include residential treatment center for youth, vocational rehabilitation agency, high school, university counseling centers, inpatient behavior unit, private practice, and neurofeedback clinic, as well as various outpatient settings. There's not enough hours in the day, Eric. Eric is the creator and previous coordinator of a collegiate recovery program at the University of North Carolina, Greensboro, and currently he is the core faculty with the clinical mental health counseling program at Northwestern University. Eric views his role as a counselor to be broader than the traditional clinical hour. From a public health perspective, he encourages professional counselors to embrace their professional identity while promoting optimal development and wellness in a multicultural world. So let's welcome Eric Easton.
Thanks, Val, for that introduction. It's great to be back in Kansas, and I hope you all are as excited as I am to be at this conference this year. Counseling with a Purpose is a great theme, and I'm excited to talk a little bit about ways that I live into that purpose as a counselor, and hopefully ways that you can live into your purpose as a counselor. When people give those introductions, it's kind of hard for me to hear, because in a lot of ways I don't really believe that I'm that person people are describing. You see, if this was 9 years ago, I would have introduced myself something like this. Hi, my name is Eric, and I'm an addict. And I would have believed it. And it would have been my whole identity. It would have been wrapped up in this concept of myself as an addict. And I would have thought that I was less than. I would have thought that you all were judging me. My heart would have been racing, my palms sweating, and I would have been looking for the nearest exit and the closest drink of drug. But today I'm blessed to stand here in front of you and say, hi, my name is Eric Neeson, and I'm a person in long-term recovery. And what that means for me is I haven't had to take a drink or a drug to feel normal since July 21st, 2006. My addiction's taken a lot of things away from me, but my recovery has blessed me beyond measure in ways that I would have never even dreamed of previously in my life. I'm able to be an active participant in my own life, an active participant in the life of my family and my loved ones, and an active participant in the life of my communities. And I share that with you today so that you also might know that hope of recovery. I share that with you today so that you might tap into your own recovery story, whatever that might be. I share that with you today so that we might find ways that we can always be ever reminded of the hope of recovery in the work that we do. So the conference theme this year, as we all know, is counseling with a purpose. So I looked up what purpose meant, and luckily the internet gave me some strong definitions. So purpose is the reason why, the aim or intention, or the feeling of being determined. So what is the reason why we counsel? Why do we get out of bed in the morning? What is the aim or intention of our counseling? What do we hope to accomplish? And then what is it that helps us to be determined each and every day that we get up and we go to the school systems, or we go to the clinical mental health counseling settings, or we go to higher education? Some people would say that purpose is important, if not crucial, to life. The great existential psychotherapist Viktor Frankl said that the purpose in life is the pursuit of meaning. And he went on to say that life is not made unbearable by circumstances, but only by a lack of purpose. So purpose is important. Purpose helps us to deal with the struggles of our everyday lives. Purpose helps us struggle with the systems that seem to be never changing, the clients that seem to never get better, the existing systemic oppression that our clients are faced with every day that make it difficult for progress to happen. Our purpose helps us to get up in the morning and to be excited, to go to a place, to live into who we are as professional counselors. Luckily, the ACA provides us a pretty solid definition of what counseling is. And according to this definition, it says that counseling is a professional relationship that empowers diverse individuals, groups, and families to achieve their mental health, wellness, career, and academic goals. Empowers diverse individuals, groups, and families to accomplish mental health, wellness, education, and career goals. That sounds like a good purpose to me. And while this definition might be contentious to some, it gives us a foundation as we can start to build up and grow into our purpose as professional counselors. So in doing that today, I want to talk about one way that I live into that purpose and hopefully talk with you about ways that we as a profession can embody a growing recovery movement across the United States. In doing that, I want to talk briefly about the neuroscience of addiction as a foundation for this new recovery movement. I'll share a little bit about my personal story of recovery, and then finally talk about this new recovery movement and talk about some practical ways that we as professional counselors embody our professional identity, live into our purpose at this broader level that might transcend the traditional clinical hour or the regular school day. Anybody know what this image is from? I think we've seen it at some point. That traditional public service announcement that said, this is your brain on drugs. These fear-based tactics were the crux of prevention and education in the 80s, 90s. And thankfully, we've come a long way from this reductionistic view of how the brain responds and adapts to drug use. We now know about the neuroscience of addiction. So in order to illustrate that fact, I'm going to need 2 volunteers that really like cookies, specifically of the chocolate variety. Yeah, come on up. Yeah, come on. I should have said you have to be a little agile and energetic to participate, but I'm hoping that these folks can do that. So this is a little game called Get As Many Cookies to the Plate as Possible. Does that make sense? What's your name? Sinaida. Welcome, Sinaida, everybody. All right, so Sinaida is going to use this plate. Jackie, where are you all from? Emporia. Emporia's in the house. All right, so Sinaida, I need you to come over here. Stand here. This is going to be your starting point. And Jackie, you're going to be here. All right? So when I say go, this is a starting line. You weren't track stars, were you? Okay. So this is a starting line. So when I say go, you're both going to race, and you're going to go get those cookies and put them on your plate. And you're going to repeat that as many times as possible, okay?
1 cookie at a time.
1 cookie at a time, all right? So here's the catch. You are going to come this way. So you're going to come around this podium, over to the cookies, you know, as much pace as you want. Grab a cookie, put it on there, and repeat it over again, okay? Got it? And then you, Jackie, are going to come this way. Got it? Good? All right, let's get a drum roll, please. On your mark, get set, go.
Do the projectors.
Let's hear some cheering. They might be able to cheer. All right, 10 seconds. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, stop. Yeah. All right, so Sinaida, go ahead and count how many you got.
There's only 5.
5. Only 5. She got 5. And Jack, you want to count? She's a little short on breath. Give her a second. 13 to 5. So let's give them both a round of applause. So I'm really curious to hear what your experience was like.
I'm kind of out of breath. The projector was in the way, so that was kind of annoying. And this necklace I had to hold, so that was kind of annoying too.
Yeah.
It was unfair.
It was unfair.
Yeah. And I didn't have my running shoes on, so.
So if you had to do it over again your way, what would you have done?
This way and then this way. No, I would have just grabbed the whole thing though.
Maybe you would have grabbed the whole
Just
thing.
dumped it on there.
Right. Why would you have done it that way?
Yeah, because I just make one trip, just dump it all on there and then put it back.
It's easy, it's one trip. I'm assuming it's quicker.
Yeah.
It's more efficient, and you get more of what you want, right?
The Oreos.
Yeah, the Oreos. Why didn't you go for any of the other cookies?
I don't know, because I thought the Oreos were.
Oh, good. Good. So, Jackie, let's hear from you. What was that experience?
It's nice and easy.
Nice and easy,
Yeah.
smooth, right?
Yeah, I'm still out of breath, but yeah.
Still out of breath. She was excited. If you saw her face, she was determined to get those things that she wanted. So, thank you all for participating, and feel free to take these cookies back and share them with whoever you like. Yeah. Give them another round, everybody. Oh, look at these. That's so nice. Raise your hand if you want a cookie from the lady. So that's my goal, to distract you with chocolate so you don't actually listen to what I'm talking about. So let's talk for a moment about the brain and how the brain develops. Dr. Dan Siegel, who popularizes interpersonal neurobiology, uses his hand model to teach people about how the brain develops and how it works together. So according to this theory, From the brainstem up to the base of the skull, and the cerebellum, which is the middle part or palm of our hand, is the survival center of the brain. So this is what's responsible for those more automatic processes, heart rate, respiration, and our fight, flight, and freeze response. This part of our brain developed first because it was responsible for our survival, hence why it's called the survival brain. Next part to develop was represented by our thumb, and this is the amygdala and the hippocampus, among other things, that's referred to as the limbic system, or the emotional brain. So this part of our brain is responsible for generating emotions, as well as certain aspects of memory, especially those highly emotional memories, things like flashbulb memories, things that are significantly related to intense pleasure, intense trauma, intense pain, life or death memories. Here. The last part of our brain is represented by our fingers, which fold over to represent the neocortex. And from our knuckles down here, we have the prefrontal cortex. And this is referred to as our thinking brain. This is where executive functioning, where planning, where decision making goes on. And maybe more importantly, this part of the brain helps to regulate the emotions that are generated in this limbic system. So as the brain develops, it evolves to use these different systems in an interconnected way to produce those things that we call emotional and behavioral responses. So what does this have to do with our exercise? Person two, I'm going to forget your name already, Sinaida, represented actually, I need to revamp for a minute. Jackie represented what's been called low road or bottom down processing in the brain. This is the brain's go system, where the limbic system, the emotional brain, and the survival brain are really, really active. This happens really, really quick, normally outside of people's conscious awareness. So what happens is information comes into the brain, it's interpreted by the thalamus, and the thalamus is referred to as the brain switchboard. So what this does is evaluate that sensory information based upon previous experience to see if it's related to life or death, threat or no threat, or extreme pleasure, extreme sensations, whether it requires a life or death response. And if it is that way, it reroutes information down through the limbic system, through our spinal cord, and creates what we call emotional and behavioral responses. So this is the low road. This always gets the first shot at responding to information that we collect as individuals, the go system. Sinaida, right? Okay, perfect. She represented what's been called top-down or high road processing. And what happens here is sensory information comes into the brain, is interpreted by the thalamus. If it's not related to any of this information, like fight or flight, life or death, intense emotional reactions, if it's a novel experience that we don't have anything to compare it to, it reroutes information to the prefrontal cortex to be evaluated, and then it redirects information back down through the limbic system, through the spinal cord, which creates our emotional and behavioral consequences. So this high road processing happens not as quickly as we saw, right? There's more steps involved. It takes longer to learn. And oftentimes it's difficult to enact control over this low road processing, especially if it's really well practiced or it's related to very strong biological, psychological, and social reinforcements. If she would have taken the low road, she would have gotten them all in one shot because it would have been a lot more efficient, it would have been quicker, and it would have led to this reinforcement, not only at a biological level, but a psychological level, and then a social level, because she would have been able to give more focus to you in a more timely fashion. So what does this mean for addiction? So in addiction, we start to see that when a person comes into these sensory stimuli that might be related to substance use, whether that's people, places, things, smells, music, whatever that might be, the brain begins this reaction on the low road immediately. The brain expects that this substance is going to come. And when the brain doesn't get that neurochemical flood of dopamine from the substance, the brain's like, yo, what's up? Like, I thought this was going to happen, and now it's not. So what does that lead to? It leads to a people in recovery or people who still struggle with addictions, it takes a lot of work, a lot of skills, and a lot of resilience to stay sober for 1 minute. Because all this stuff is going on under the radar of the person's conscious experience. They are resilient people for being able to be sober, to be clean, to be in recovery for 1 single minute. So to enact long-term sustained recovery is very, very hard. As the nucleus accumbens, which is connected here to the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex, is flooded with dopamine, the hippocampus lays down a memory, and then the amygdala creates this conditioned response. And what we know about conditioned responses is they happen automatically, right? If I hit your patella tendon, what's going to happen? It's going to reflex, hopefully, in most cases. So in a lot of ways, substance use, the desire, the cravings, the compulsion of that behavior, of that drinking, that drug, becomes this reflexive response. Not something that people sit around and say, oh my gosh, I'm going to get high today. It doesn't typically evolve in that way. So we know this now, and we know that the disease of addiction is referred to as a disease of brain circuits. The dysfunction in those brain circuits then leads to what we call those characteristic symptoms, what we use as professional counselors called DSM criteria. And if you know anything about the new DSM, it used to be substance abuse and substance dependence. What is it now? Substance use disorder. So it's very possible that some people might meet the criteria for a substance use disorder initially, but not necessarily meet the criteria for an addiction. But over time, that biological, that psychophysiological dependence, that reflexive process develops into a full-blown active addiction. So how does this process develop? So we're all born with a DNA that contains our instructions for how our organism is going to develop. Some of us, as we know, have dispositions to different conditions, whether it be heart disease, diabetes, or addiction. We know this is that nature side of things. Then we're born and we start to interact with our environment. And these are things from environmental toxins to systematic oppression to prejudice to racism to early attachment figures to nurturing educational environments. And based upon what we experience, how our genetics interact with our environment, that determines whether or not that genetic code, those DNA instructions, are going to be activated or suppressed. That's the nurture side of things, what we call epigenetics. And based upon what we experience, some people might initiate use. That initiation of use can look a lot of different ways. For one person, it might be curiosity, as we know. Just, hey, I wonder what that's all about. I see my friends doing it, I'm just curious. For another person, I might get injured at a high school football game and have a significant surgery and get prescribed an opioid that kicks in this addictive predisposition that I have. No fault of my own, just how things happen. How my body, my brain, and my environment interact. For some people, it might be one use that kicks in that addictive pathway, that disposition. For another person, it might be a repeated use that takes that physiological dependence a while to develop. But regardless of how this process develops, it ends at this same place. This complex psychological, biological, and social manifestation that we call addiction. As we all know, active use typically turns into consequences of use. And you all are familiar with that classic term, hitting rock bottom, right? Has anybody not heard that term before? Watching back there. Hitting bottom is a term that some people like, some people don't like. But at the crux of it, it represents this point at which a person gets to that they don't ever want to go back to again. And they're willing to do whatever it takes to get to that, or to stay away from that point again. Some people would call this pre-recovery. For those of us familiar with stages of change models, that's that pre-contemplation, into-contemplation, into preparation stage. When hitting bottom becomes that brief window, that brief moment of time through which recovery can be initiated. That window is so small and treatment is not always coming as quick. There's tremendous barriers to access treatment, even when that window to initiate recovery is there. We talk about things like recovery capital now. Recovery capital as an assessment to help people identify the internal and the external resources that they have to initiate recovery or sustain recovery. We talk a lot about relapse prevention, but we don't talk a lot financial capital, whatever it is that's going to help that person initiate and sustain recovery. And that may be our role, but it might not. And we have to sometimes say, it's okay to refer, and I'm going to walk alongside of you in that, or I'm going to walk alongside of you in that journey. So hopefully as recovery is initiated, it can be initiated in different ways. I mean, like there's many pathways to how addiction evolves, there's many pathways to how recovery is initiated. For some people, it might be a relationship with the criminal justice system. For other people, it just might be a personal revelation. For other people, it might be, I go to treatment and I learn that I have a problem. For another person, it might be a student sitting in an addictions counseling class and says, oh my gosh, I might have a problem. So as people initiate recovery with adequate supports, with ongoing recovery supports, with recovery capital, hopefully they reach this place of sustained recovery. But what does sustained recovery mean? I mean, heck, what does recovery even mean, right? We all have a different definition of that. For one person, recovery might look like complete and total abstinence from all mind-altering substances, including prescription medications. For another person, it might mean non-problematic use. It might mean medication-assisted treatment. It might mean a full spectrum of things. So it's important that as we're working with clients and they're considering recovery, that we explore what recovery means to this person. Maybe even what addiction has been to this person and how recovery is going to help people get that thing that they wanted so badly, and they saw drug use as a way to get that thing that was so important. So we're going to have to work to define what recovery is for our folks, to establish treatment outcomes that's grounded in our clients' cultural awareness and their cultural identity. And I really believe that sustained recovery is about an enhanced quality of life. I worry sometimes that rigid abstinence-only thinking gets in the way of establishing a strong therapeutic relationship and is short-sighted and sometimes misses the mark. We know from psychological studies for years that the more we focus on the things we don't want, the more we get them. So what if we went from relapse prevention to recovery promotion? What if our treatment goals were quality of life instead of, I will not use X amount of substances for 12 months, or whatever our treatment plan might say. So not to say that abstinence is a bad thing at all, but just to say that abstinence might be the way to that quality of life. Abstinence might be the way to get those things that are so important to folks that they haven't found a way to get previously. Abstinence is not recovery. Abstinence is a way to recover. So what did this process look like for me? And before I go on, I just want to say that in a lot of ways, my story is unremarkable. I know people with far more compelling stories than me, and I bet there are people in this room that have far more compelling stories than I do. With that being said, I believe I have an obligation as a person in recovery to talk about recovery as much to as many people as I can. I believe that I have an obligation to talk about recovery so that others might find recovery. I think that I have an obligation to talk about recovery for the many of people that have not yet found recovery and that will never find recovery because they have died from the disease of addiction. Anonymity has clouded the recovery field for a long time. And one of the central purposes of the new recovery movement is to step out of that anonymity to speak about our recovery process so that when legislators make decisions, they know who that person, what that decision affects, and who that decision affects. So I was born, like many people, into a pretty traditional, white, middle-class family, a life of privilege. Things were pretty easy for me. Things looked pretty normal from the outside. My mom worked in real estate, dad worked in a glass factory. Mom was pretty emotionally expressive, didn't really have a religious identity. Dad was not emotionally expressive, had a really strong religious identity, had really high expectations. He was the type of guy where you had to work for everything you got. Mom was kind of like, I want you to have everything you need kind of thing. Most of the time at her own expense. So as you can probably guess, that led to conflicts in their relationship. And I remember in second grade, I was watching my favorite movie at the time, Captain America. Anybody know the old Captain America, not this movie? So as Captain America was, using his fancy shield to vanquish his enemies, my mom and dad came in and they said, Eric, we got to talk with you about something. Now, I don't know about you, but I've learned that nothing good typically comes after your parents saying that So they took me in the kitchen, and honestly, this conversation was like a minute long. They said, Eric, we're going to be getting a divorce. And it sounds silly today, but I remember it as clear as yesterday. The thing that ran through my mind was, does this mean I'm going to get 2 Christmases and 2 birthdays? How sick is that, really? But think about the adaptive process that had for me. My brain, my insides did not know how to comprehend this thing, didn't even have a conceptualization of what that meant. So my psyche projected these things into my external world, these tangible things of Christmases and birthdays that I knew about, that protected my insides, that served as a really strong defense. And those continued throughout my lives. My defenses were really, really strong, blocking my insides from getting out, blocking that internal turmoil from leaking into my life, or at least I thought it did. So I went on through life like many children of divorce. I lived with my mom during the week, dad on the weekends, except the last weekend in the month when I stayed with my mom. Sounds confusing even to me today, and it's tough. Because not only did I go back and forth, but mom talked bad about dad, dad talked bad about mom, and here I am stuck in the middle trying to figure out how I'm supposed to develop, what expectations I'm supposed to live up to. Dad had one set, mom had another set, and here I am thinking that I'm never going to be good enough. And that thought process continued to emerge, continued to develop. As I thought I was no good, I thought I was never going to live up to any of these expectations. I thought I was never going to be good enough. And these things continued to evolve in my life. It wasn't just that way at home or with my family, but it continued when my dad got remarried and had new children. You know, and not only did I start to think that I wasn't good enough, but I started to think that I was being replaced. I started to think that I was unlovable. I started to think that I was never going to be loved. I started to think that I was no good. And you know, in a lot of ways, any remnants of self-esteem or a self-concept that I had started to leak out. So this continued in other areas of my life. You know, I tried to have relationships to fill myself up. That didn't work. I tried to play sports, but was never really good enough to make the team. So this continued message just began to evolve, and as I tried more and more things to try to fill myself up, to try to answer the emptiness that was inside, it just kept leaking out. And I was left broken, I was left empty, I was left with a sense that I was no good, that I was never going to be good enough. So when I was 16, like many folks do who are 16, they'd get a driver's license and a new car. So suddenly my quest for something to fill myself up broadened, and I had a lot of new resources in which to do that. You see, I had these friends in junior high that got high, but at that point, you know, it wasn't me. You know, I thought that was the bad thing to do. I thought those were the bad things. They're still my friends, but you know, I wasn't going to do that. But when I was 16, I reached out to those friends and I said, you know what? I want to smoke pot. So at the age of 16, I started smoking pot. Within a week, I started snorting cocaine. And within a month, I started dropping LSD. And that began my use. That began years of substance use. And you know what? All of a sudden, I found a community that I fit into. I found a community that accepted me as I was. I found a community that encouraged individuality. I found something that I was in control of, as I thought. I found something that I was good at. I found something that I could be the best at. I could be the best drug addict there was. I could do the most drugs that anyone could. That was my esteem. That was how I tried to build that self-concept up. And as my drug use continued, like many consequences started to emerge. I don't like to typically talk about the nitty-gritty, dirty stuff of addiction, but I will share a few things that I was able to accomplish in my addiction career. Broken relationships, destroyed remnants of any true friendship that I ever had, removing myself from my dad's relationship altogether, stealing, getting caught stealing, multiple physical altercations, totaling cars. Last semester in high school, I got a 0.0 GPA. Somehow I went to undergrad. Amazing how those things happen. Spent my entire undergraduate career on probation. The summer before my senior year, fell down a flight of steps, probably overdosed, gave myself a subdural hematoma. For those of you that don't know what that is, my brain was bleeding. Didn't even go to the hospital for 2 days. Spent a week in the hospital, and some would say that I've never truly recovered from that. I still, and that's a joke in some ways, but the reality is, I still deal with the consequences, the physical consequences of my substance use every day. Somehow, magically, I got into the last semester of undergrad, and they tried to kick me out of school. Luckily, I've always had really good enablers in my life, and I've had people that have believed in me for whatever reason. One of my mentors, as they tried to kick me out of school, he called a meeting with the dean of students, so we all sat down, and he was like, what do we need to do to get Eric to stay in school? It's his last semester, right? He's worked really hard to get here. Good enablers. So here's what I had to agree to stay in school. I had to move off campus. I was only allowed on campus for academic activities. If I was found on campus for any other reason, they would immediately expel me from school. At any point I was on campus, they could breathalyze me randomly. If I was found to be intoxicated, they would kick me out of school. And not just that, but I had to agree not to come back to campus for a year after I graduated. And if I came back, I would be arrested for trespassing immediately. Somehow I graduated amidst those consequences of my decisions and my drug use. In a lot of ways, I think they just let me graduate because they wanted to get rid of me. I can't prove that, but it's sort of secret like that. After I graduated, I moved back home and reconnected with the friends that I had before I went to undergrad, and my drug use spiraled. Like many undergraduates of psychology programs, I delivered pizza. Sorry if there's any undergrad psych majors. It gets better after that. And one other thing I'll say is that even in this substance use, as I was trying to fill my cup up even more and it continued to run out, and I continued to have more consequences and more things happen, I managed to get this relationship with somebody. And for those of you that, well, one of the themes of my story is just trying to find connection from anywhere I can get it. And I had this relationship that I really thought was my everything. I really thought I was something in this relationship. And without that relationship, I thought I was nothing. It was a toxic relationship. Many terrible things happened. And as that relationship evolved, as many relationships in my life did, it ended eventually because of those consequences of my substance use. And at that point, I thought my life was over. I thought there was no way coming back, and my drug use really spiraled to a point that it hadn't got to before. Doing things I hadn't done in a long time, and my identity just being crushed. And on July 21st, 2006, I was arrested. So my pathway to recovery began with a 9mm pointed at my head from the narcotics task force, and then proceeding to drive me around for hours upon end, telling me how screwed I was, how I was going to spend the rest of my life in prison. Luckily, I'm a man, a white male of great privilege, and my dad, who I hadn't talked to in months, came to jail, bailed me out, gave me a roof over my head, put food in my belly, got me a job, got me a lawyer. Great resources that I had. And my journey to recovery began. I went to treatment. As you can see, these are some of my treatment schedules and my early AA books. I did my 90 meetings in 90 days plus, and my recovery started. But early in recovery, I still hadn't convinced myself that I was done using drugs. I convinced myself that I did not want to go to jail, and I was going to be sober so that I didn't have to go to jail. My lawyer said, I am going to delay your trial as long as possible to give you enough time to prove to the judge that you're more of an asset to your community than you are a detriment. And I took that word to heart, and I continued to do everything I could to build my recovery resume. And I was so blessed that it took the full 2 years for my court case to be resolved. Because in that time, I was able to learn some great things that have sustained my I learned that I wasn't so bad. I learned that I could have a purpose. I learned that I could get those things that were so valuable to me in other ways. I talked about some of the reasons why I continued to use it. It was social connection. It was I belonged to a community. It was I had power, I had esteem, I had money, I had relationships. All these things that I thought were so reinforcing to me, things I didn't have. The other side of that is I didn't like myself and I was no good. So in a way, my substance use was a form of self-injury. I used it in a way that was really, really harmful, with the hopes that, who knows what's going to happen, but I wouldn't care otherwise. So as I entered into recovery, I started to see that life did matter, that I could get relationships, that I could have that esteem, that I could have a sense of control, a sense of efficacy in a way that was going to be sustaining. I got a purpose. I met with a pastor of a church that had previously shunned me and called me the bad kid as a teenager. I went back and he showed me this scripture that said, you were once shown compassion so that you can therefore show compassion to other people in the same way that was shown to you. And at that moment, I melted. I mean, I can't even imagine how I survived the amount of tears that came out of my face that day. Because that became my purpose. That became what I lived by each and every day, even to the day. How can I show compassion in the same way that it was shown to me? Regardless of your recovery story, regardless of your story, how can you show compassion to others in the same way that it was shown to you? So that became a springboard that really launched me into sustained recovery. But recovery wasn't always easy. I still dealt with a lot of shame. I dealt with a lot of guilt. I dealt with a lot of stigma still from society as a person in recovery. I dealt with the consequences of my substance use. And this continued for a long time. I also didn't like this identity that I had as an addict. I called myself an addict when I was at meetings, but honestly, it felt really bad to me. It pulled me back into this mental state that I didn't want to be in anymore. But at that point, I didn't have anything else. Being an addict was better than being nothing. And without being an addict, that's what I thought I was, until I began to develop that new sense of self. I learned that I could get that new cup, right? A new cup that didn't take away any of the brokenness of my past or any of the trauma of my past, but that capitalized upon it, that used the resources and the resiliency that I developed in years of foolish living, years the victim of circumstances, of a mental illness, of whatever, but to use that to sustain me as a person, as a whole person, to allow me to start to fill up my cup in a new way. And whenever I called myself an addict, it was like that cup was trying to come back out again. But I didn't know another way, right? And my treatment program was 12-step oriented, and that's the way I thought I was supposed to be. I thought I was doomed and gloomed to live a life of misery from this illness that had no cure. Jails, institutions, and deaths, that's the only place that I'm going to end up if I continue this path. So I struggled with that for a long time. I was lucky enough to get into a master's degree program, to get a graduate degree, to accomplish many of the things that I was talking about. But there still was something that was missing. So about a year ago, I got asked to create a collegiate recovery program. I asked, what was a collegiate recovery program? They said, we don't know, but we got a grant to build one. I said, ooh, sounds like a good idea, right? So over the next year of my life, I learned about this new recovery movement that has been growing in the United States for years. And it recently had a revitalization. And with this knowledge of the new recovery movement, finally I found a community that talked about being in recovery instead of talking about being an addict. With it came a new language. With it came a new way to view myself that was sustaining. It was great to go to conferences and recovery summits and be with other people in recovery that talked about their recovery in an affirming, non-stigmatizing way that challenged people's perceptions of addiction, that challenged people's perceptions of what recovery was and what people in recovery are. So what is the new recovery movement? The new recovery movement is an organized effort to remove barriers to recovery and enhance the quality of life for people in recovery. It's an organized effort of the over 26 million plus adults in America that report being in recovery. 26 million plus, that is a constituency of consequence that the new recovery movement is trying to mobilize to enact policy changes that will remove barriers to recovery and improve the quality of life for people in recovery. William White is a recovery advocate and one of the premier researchers of the recovery movement, and he talks about the central message of this new recovery movement not being that addiction is a disease or that treatment works, but rather that recovery is, that permanent recovery is not only possible, but a reality. And many people say that this new recovery movement is a civil rights movement at its core, because people in recovery, me included, face discrimination a lot. As a person in recovery, going on 10 years, every time I apply for a job, apply for a license, there's a box I have to check. And that box I check needs these things to happen that bring me back to this addict identity again. And I love the diligence of state licensure boards and employers, but there's an affirming way to do it that doesn't bring people back into that addictive identity. There's a way to support people that promotes their recovery and doesn't stop them from practicing. Earlier in my life, I would have wallowed in that self-pity and I would have got high again. But luckily, I've learned to turn affect into action, not to quench those emotions that boil up, but to use those to fuel action, to fuel change. So I've written a Department of Justice complaint against state licensure boards who have that question on their application. And we'll see what happens with that. Turn affect into action. There's some core values of this new recovery movement. The first is that recovery is a reality. One of the central purposes is to call people in recovery out of the shadows, to be a face and voice of recovery so that people know that recovery is possible. There are many pathways and styles to recovery. Although 12-step fellowships are a very common, very effective way, there are other pathways to recovery. Some might be medication assisted, some might be moderation management. There are many other ways and pathways to recovery. Recovery flourishes in supportive communities. There's a story that talks about addiction as a sick and dying tree. And we take these sick and dying trees out of the soil with which it grew, and we put it into healthier soil, and we care for it, and we nurture it back to health. And then we uproot it, we take it to the same soil that it got sick in, and then we shame it, and we blame it, and we call it resistant and non-compliant when it gets sick again. We got to treat the soil. We got to look at our roles as counselors, our purpose as a counselor beyond that of the traditional clinical hour, beyond that of the regular school day, to look at what it means as a counselor to embody our core values of social justice, to promote change that leads to long-term recovery. Recovery is a voluntary process. We can mandate treatment, but we can't mandate recovery. And finally, people in recovery are a part of the solution. There's a growing peer support movement across the United States. And people, if we don't start showing that counseling is effective and counseling is really good, we're going to see people in recovery being able to do our job much better than we might be as a professional. Not to say that we need to fight against them, we need to work with peer support specialists. We need to include them in our treatment plans. We need to work alongside people in recovery so that we can help folks in recovery achieve that quality of life. Where did this new recovery movement talk about? You know, we can trace it back to we can trace it back to the early Native Americans in recovery circles. In the 1930s, we saw Alcoholics Anonymous start to emerge, and we saw this growing recovery movement in the United States. We saw Marty Mann, one of Bill W.'s first sponsees, able to advocate to start to get legislative through that established national boards. We saw Senator Howard Hughes start to advocate as a person in recovery on the Senate floor, to give Senate testimony as a person in recovery that led to the creation of local drug and alcohol boards. We saw Betty Ford give her supportment, which led to unprecedented funding in recovery and support. But as we know, in the 80s and 90s, America thought it was a good idea to villainize drug addiction. We saw these images in hopes of persons in recovery replaced with images of black males selling crack on street corners, crack-addicted infants, and we started to villainize the disease of addiction. All of a sudden, you can imagine what happened to those early recovery advocates. All of a sudden, it was no longer safe for them to be a person in recovery. So they went into the shadows. But luckily, the new recovery movement started to emerge in the late 1990s with the advent of recovery community organizations that organized at the local level to promote advocacy, to promote faces and voices of recovery. We saw a recovery summit in 2002 in St. Paul, Minnesota. Out of that summit came the founding of the first national advocacy organization focusing on people, on persons in recovery, called Faces and Voices of Recovery. Since then, we've seen numerous organizations form: Unite to Face Addiction, Transforming Youth Recovery, Young People in Recovery, the Association of Recovery Schools, the Association of Recovery in Higher Education. We're seeing a growing movement at a national level to organize people in recovery, to lead up to these changes, to help people get into sustained recovery. We've seen research into people in recovery. For years, it was hard to find people in recovery to participate in the research, but as people are supported, they're coming out more and more, and we're seeing and we're learning more about what this recovery experience is like that can help us guide our treatment, to find those critical incidences in the recovery process that we can use as professional counselors to capitalize upon. We saw the appointment of the first recovery czar, Michael Botticelli, a person in long-term recovery, finally guiding the nation in how to provide supports to people in recovery. The Surgeon General issued the first ever report on drug use, treatment, and recovery. He describes this as a report that's going to be similar to the report on the tobacco industry that led to sweeping reforms in the tobacco industry. That should come out sometime this spring, and the intention is that we're going to see those same sweeping reforms to the opioid pharmacies, to prescription doctors, to the way that pharmaceutical companies market and distribute medications. We see ban-the-box movements. We see pending legislation to increase recovery supports, to provide access to higher education for people in recovery. I don't know if everybody knows, but folks with felony convictions cannot get federal financial aid to go to school. New legislation will be in place that gets rid of that condition, that removes barriers to recovery, that removes barriers to quality of life. And one of maybe the most important advances in this new recovery movement for me has been the documentary, The Anonymous People. Has anybody seen it? Amen. Amen. One tangible thing, if you do nothing else after this keynote today, one tangible thing you can do is go to Netflix. It's streaming for free, and watch the documentary, The Anonymous People. And it will capture what I've talked about today in a very eloquent way, and talk about this growing recovery movement and what that looks like in America and ways that we can contribute to this movement. I want to highlight a few advances that we've seen. We know that words are important, right? We've seen research that shows that when people are referred to as addicts, when people are referred to as substance abusers, people tend to look at them in a more negative light. But yet we still use this language on a day-to-day basis. So one of the purposes, one of the outcomes of this new recovery movement is a new recovery language. Recovery is now defined by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. Even though there's a push to change their name, they still use substance abuse in their name. The definition of recovery is a process of change through which individuals improve their health and wellness, live a self-directed life, and strive to reach their full potential. Seems like it aligns pretty well with our purpose as professional counselors. With this came a training called Our Stories Have Power, Recovery Community Messaging Training. This was created by Faces and Voices of Recovery to unify advocacy voice so that we all speak with one voice about recovery. And honestly, folks, this training changed my life because it provided me with that answer to that identity problem they had. No longer did I have to be an addict anymore. It provides a sort of a formula to follow for people people in recovery that you all heard earlier. Hi, my name is Eric Beeson, and I am a person in long-term recovery. And this is what it means to me, and this is what it's done for me, and this is why I am sharing it with you. So there's a consistent message that talks about who people in recovery are, how people in recovery contribute to themselves, to their families, to their friends, and to their communities. And what if you're not a person in recovery? There's other messages for allies to people in recovery, for family members of people in recovery, that help folks walk into that identity, to live in that affirming way, to share that message, to share that hope of recovery. And it might go something like this. Hi, my name is Eric Beeson, and I'm an ally to a person in recovery. I'm an ally to people in recovery. And you know what? Even if you are a person in recovery, there's still consequences, there's still stigma associated with that, and it's not safe to disclose. You can always be an ally to people in recovery and support the movement in this way. I support people living in recovery from addictions in the following ways. People in recovery that I know, especially students, are the most dedicated, hardworking, sometimes compulsive people that I've ever met, but the most caring and gracious, willing to give back to their schools, to their communities. But they feel scared. They feel shame. They feel guilt. They don't want to out themselves as a person in recovery to their administration sometimes for fear of stigma, for the results of internalized stigma. This messaging gives people language to lead into a new identity. I see the look on people's faces when they finally don't have to refer to themselves as addicts anymore, and they have a new language. I've seen it change lives, and I hope that it changes ours. We saw a transformation of the existing system of care. We focused on prevention and education for a long time, health promotion for a long time. All are great things to do. We used treatment and intervention, but in this old system of care, something was missing. So we had to create recovery-oriented systems of care that add aftercare recovery supports to this continuum. And everything with this recovery orientation, so that everything we're doing is not just focusing on preventing something that we don't like, but promoting something that we do. Promoting this recovery process that contributes to individuals' lives and communities' lives. And some would even argue that recovery will be the new prevention. As people see more and more people in recovery, as it becomes cool to be in recovery, students might see that and say, hey, I want some of that stuff that he's on. He's on recovery. We saw the foundation of the beginning of a recovery school movement. This is collegiate recovery programs. These are recovery high schools. There were 4 collegiate recovery programs in 2002. There are over 150 across the United States today. And those are just the ones we know about. There are recovery schools, recovery high schools popping up all over the United States. Here's a map that shows recovery schools and recovery high schools across the United States. Anybody see something that's missing in the middle of that map? There was a study in 2013 by the Association of Recovery High Schools, and they were giving favorability rankings for the possibility of creating recovery schools. Guess what Kansas was ranked? Second worst in the nation. Favorability for recovery schools. The outcomes are tremendous. Better GPA, better retention and graduation rates, lower return to use rates, enhanced quality of life. High school, college, throughout college into later careers, the outcomes are tremendous, but yet we still spend a lot of money in other areas. So we got to address this. We at least got to consider this as an option. There are school counselors abundant in this room. And if you don't hear anything else today, look into what recovery schools are, what it means to have a recovery school in your community, and consider what it might look like to bring one of those. It takes little to start a collegiate recovery program. Opening a recovery high school might take a little bit more work. But we got some leaders in this room that can walk into that purpose, that can be leaders in the field, that can promote recovery. There's a legislative initiative right now called the Comprehensive Addiction and Recovery Act, CARE. It was unanimously passed out of committee Monday and is now being debated on the floor. If remove that financial aid barrier. It will increase funding to aftercare supports. Not just when people get out of treatment, they go to more treatment, but there are supports in place for them to continue to thrive in their recovery. It will increase recovery supports for marginalized populations, for women. It will just be quite frankly, the most comprehensive reform of addiction policy that we've ever seen. And it's going to be voted on very soon. So counseling with a purpose. I've rambled for a long time. You've heard about the neuroscience of addiction. You've heard about my personal musings of recovery. You've heard about this new recovery movement. So now the question is turned to you all in what will we do? How are we to respond to this new recovery movement? And I'm going to encourage you again to think about your purpose as a professional counselor that extends beyond the traditional clinical hour, that extends beyond the traditional school day. We know more and more about the influence of environmental factors in early childhood. We've got to treat the soil. What is our purpose? To promote social justice as a way of helping our clients to achieve their mental health, wellness, education, and career goals. So what can you do? I'll give you some ideas. One, you can watch Anonymous People this weekend. Make it a movie night with your family. You can learn about recovery community organizations. You can bring community messaging training to your communities. You can plan screenings of the Anonymous People and pair it with community messaging trainings. You can look into recovery high schools. You can look into collegiate recovery programs. You can include those in your college prep work when you're working with people in recovery and they want to go to a school that's going to support their recovery. Colleges, if you don't know, are referred to as recovery hostile environments. We know what happens on college campuses, and it's hard for people in recovery to go back to school sometimes. So if they want to go back, help them find a school that has a collegiate recovery. Build allies. Even if you are a person in recovery or not a person in recovery, build ally training workshops. Learn the skills that it takes. Change our language. It's time that we stop using words like abuse. Stop using words like addict and start promoting people with substance use disorders, people in recovery from substance use disorders, unless that counters some culturally appropriate identity with that addict identity. But we need to start changing our language. We know from the research what that language does. And even though it might be acknowledged, not acknowledged, it leads to a sense of internalized shame, internalized guilt, and internalized stigma. We've got to treat the soil. We've got to change our language. So now we're left with this challenge, I guess, of what you will do. What you will do to live into your purpose as a counselor. What will fuel you? What will be the reason that you do what you do? What will be that purpose that fuels your quest to get up every day and to do the great work that you do as professional counselors? The story, the conversation doesn't end here. This is the beginning. So I thank you all for really giving me the opportunity to share about recovery and what that's meant to me. And I hope that you'll have a new connection to your recovery story and be thinking about ways that you can live into your purpose as a professional counselor. Thank you.
So Eric, don't go away. Come back up here for a minute.
This wasn't in the contract.
Well, I know, but us counselors have things. First of all, I think that all of us want to applaud you for, it takes a special person and a lot of courage to come up here and talk about your substance abuse disorders.
See, we're making progress.
Making progress. And to talk to us about recovery system and things that we can do to help our clients and our students. So we applaud you for that. And can I leave Kansas without you said Captain America?
Yeah.
Okay. our handouts, right back there at the back table that are yellow, from Eric's session, so grab a handout. If there are some of you that have some questions for Eric or would like to talk to him, more, you can come up here when we're done and ask him some questions or visit with him for a minute. The other announcement that we wanted to make real quick is on page 8 and 9 of your convention booklet, you will see that our division meetings are going to be this morning before lunch. The first round of division meetings are at 11:10, and then the second round are like 11, what is it? 50, okay? We really want to encourage you to go to those division meetings if you are a member of the division, or if you just have an interest. Maybe you aren't a member, but you want to see what is happening in KCA. Is we have several very active divisions. And then unfortunately, we have several divisions that have become very inactive. And for a division to be a part of KCA and have voting rights with the organization, we have to have at least 15 members in that division. They can still be an interest group if they don't have 15 members, but they're not allowed then to have a say and voting on the executive board. We have a couple of those divisions that are in jeopardy now of not being able to be classified as a division, but instead of an interest group, and we really don't want that to happen. So take a look at when those division meetings are. If you are a member of a division, please attend those, and if you want to join one of the divisions or just see what it's about, attend those as well. You don't have to be a member to attend that. All right, Val, anything else?
You want to mention the swap?
What?
The elementary swap.
Is that session 1? Is it in the program?
It is.
Okay, we did have a change late in the program, so if you were looking at it's correct in here, but if you were looking online at the program, you may not have seen it, but we had a cancellation, and we had to refigure some things. So there is, one of the sessions is going to be a swap. Is that for all levels? Elementary and middle school. So you don't have to have something with you to attend that session, but they're going to be sharing some ideas and things that they can use in elementary and middle school, and it's in your booklet as well. The rest of the sessions are the same that have been advertised on the website and that since the beginning. All right, so our first breakout session begins here in about 10 minutes at 10:10. Thanks.